long before the first Spanish sail touched the horizon. The Aztecs had already discovered their greatest treasure and their greatest weakness. In a land surrounding Lake Texcoco, gold was more than metal. To the Aztecs, it was Tenochtitlan, the excrement of the gods, a gift from the sun itself. They believed it carried divine energy, the same light that gave life to their crops, their temples, their rulers. By the 15th century, their empire glimmered with it. Gold flowed from conquered cities as tribute, melted into masks, crowns, and sacred idols. In Montezuma's palace, walls shimmered like sunrise, and even the humble cups of the nobles were lined with gold. It was power made visible, and it told the world that the Aztecs ruled by divine right. But gold meant something different to those coming from across the sea. To Hernán Cortés and his men, it wasn't sacred. It was survival. In Spain, gold meant empire, trade, and eternal glory. When Montezuma's emissaries offered them gifts, plates, ornaments, dust, and discs of pure gold, the Spaniards didn't see devotion. They saw a fortune beyond imagination. One soldier wrote in his diary, "When we first saw that gold, our hearts melted, and we became slaves to our desire." And so, the fate of two worlds was sealed. The Aztecs worshipped gold as a bridge to the gods. The Spaniards hunted it as a ladder to power. And between those two visions lay the spark that would burn an empire to the ground. This is the story of how gold, the symbol of life, became the price of death. The true beginning of the fall of the Aztec Empire. Subscribe to Empires of Gold, where history's wealth is never just glitter, it's destiny. In the spring of 1519, the Gulf waters of Mexico shimmered with something unseen for generations: ships. Massive wooden beasts with white sails like wings of divine birds. They carried the men who would change the fate of an empire: Hernán Cortés and his army of 600 conquistadors. Each wore polished steel that glinted in the sunlight, and each carried one hunger in his heart: gold. They had heard the stories from the Maya and the Totonacs, stories of a city built on water, where streets were paved with markets richer than kings, where gold wasn't hidden, but displayed like sunlight itself. And at its heart stood Montezuma II, emperor of the Aztec world, a man so powerful that even his servants could not meet his gaze. When word of these strange visitors reached Tenochtitlan, Montezuma didn't see invaders. He saw prophecy. According to ancient legend, the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, had promised to return from the east, white-skinned and bearded, to reclaim his throne. And the timing was perfect. The year was one reed, 1519, the very year the prophecy said the god would return. So, Montezuma hesitated. Were these men gods, or demons in the flesh? To test them, he sent gifts, not armies. He ordered his emissaries to bring the strangers gold, silver, and sacred featherwork, offerings of peace, of divine respect. But that gesture sealed the empire's fate. For when the gifts reached Cortés, his men were entranced. Gold discs the size of shields, ornaments so fine they looked spun from sunlight. Cortés' chronicler wrote, "When we saw that gold, we no longer cared for sleep or food. It was as if our very souls had been captured by it." The Aztecs gave in reverence. The Spaniards took as invitation. Cortés replied not with gifts, but with ambition. He marched inland, 400 miles across jungles and volcanoes, forging alliances with tribes who had long suffered under Aztec tribute. The Totonacs, the Tlaxcalans, enemies of Montezuma, now became the Spaniards' sword and shield. By the time Cortés reached the Valley of Mexico, he commanded thousands. And from the causeways of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec priests watched the horizon, white sails rising above the mist like omens. To the people, it was the gods returning. To Montezuma, it was the fulfillment of destiny. To Cortés, it was the beginning of conquest. And between them, gold gleamed like the sun, waiting to decide who it truly belonged to. On a calm November morning in 1519, two worlds stood face to face. From the east came Hernán Cortés, armored in steel and ambition. From the west, Emperor Montezuma II, draped in turquoise, jade, and gold that caught the light like fire. When Cortés first saw Tenochtitlan, he stopped in awe. The city floated on a lake like a vision. Shimmering causeways, canals filled with canoes,
temples towering higher than cathedrals. One soldier wrote, "It seemed like enchantment. We thought we were dreaming." Tenochtitlan was no ordinary city. It was a miracle of engineering and faith. Home to over 200,000 people, with markets that saw 60,000 traders a day, it rivaled any city in Europe. Gold glittered from temple tops to royal palaces, not as coin, but as art, as offering. Every piece told a story that the Aztecs ruled by the favor of the gods. When Cortés entered the city, Montezuma himself came to greet him. He was carried on a golden litter, shaded by a canopy of quetzal feathers, surrounded by nobles in shimmering robes. As he stepped down, silence fell across the square. The emperor spoke softly, his words translated by Melintzin, the Nahua woman who had become Cortés' voice. He said, "You have traveled far, and your arrival was foretold. Perhaps you are he whom we have awaited." Our lord Quetzalcoatl returned. Cortés bowed, hiding his astonishment. He saw faith and opportunity. Before him stood a ruler who believed he was divine. Behind him, an empire dripping with gold. For 6 days, the Spaniards were welcomed as guests of honor. They were led through Montezuma's palace, walls covered in gold mosaics, jade carvings, obsidian mirrors. They dined on silver plates, surrounded by dancers and priests. To the Aztecs, this was generosity, divine hospitality. To Cortés, it was proof that he stood in the richest city on earth. But beneath the splendor, unease grew. Cortés' men whispered that Montezuma's eyes followed them like a falcon's. Aztec nobles watched in silence as the strangers touched sacred idols, stared too long, asked too many questions. In secret, Cortés began plotting. He knew that gold this vast would never stay untouched. He knew Spain would demand more than friendship, and he feared what might happen once the Aztecs realized these men were no gods at all. The friendship was an illusion, gilded, fragile, destined to shatter. Because gold, once offered, is never given, it is taken. The meeting of two worlds had begun, and already one was planning how to own the other. The air in Tenochtitlan had changed. What began as a celebration of divine guests was turning into a quiet storm. The people whispered. The strangers did not act like gods. They ate too much, demanded more gold, and spoke of their own king across the sea. Montezuma's nobles warned him, "These men are not gods. They are conquerors." But the emperor hesitated. His faith in the prophecy still held him back, a belief that perhaps this was all part of the gods' design. Cortés, however, had no such hesitation. He saw the tension rising, saw his men surrounded in a city of hundreds of thousands. He knew one mistake could end it all, and so he made his most daring move. One night, under the guise of diplomacy, Cortés and a handful of his soldiers entered the royal palace. They came before Montezuma with false smiles and words of peace. And then they turned their blades. The emperor of the Aztec world was taken hostage inside his own home. The city didn't believe it at first. How could a living god be imprisoned by a few hundred foreigners? But soon, word spread. Montezuma no longer walked among his people. From his balcony, he spoke under watchful eyes, telling his subjects to remain calm, to trust these newcomers. Yet in every word his power slipped away. Inside the palace, Cortés demanded gold, more gold. He ordered Montezuma's artisans to bring every ornament, every statue, every sacred relic. They melted them down into bars for shipment to Spain. Temples were stripped, idols desecrated, and as molten gold flowed like rivers, the people's faith began to burn away with it. One soldier wrote, "There was gold everywhere, in the walls, in the floors, in their temples. But none of it satisfied us. The more we took, the more we hungered." The empire had turned into a cage. Montezuma, once the living embodiment of the sun, sat silent, surrounded by men who worshipped only what glinted in its light. Outside, rebellion brewed. Aztec warriors gathered in the streets. Priests called upon the gods for vengeance, and the drums of war began to echo again across the lake. The people no longer saw Montezuma as divine. They saw him as a man who had bowed to strangers. And deep within his palace of gold, the emperor began to understand the truth, that the metal his people once called sacred had become his chain. Gold had made him a god. Now, it made him a prisoner. By the summer of 1520, Tenochtitlan was no longer a city of celebration. It was a city on the edge of eruption. The drums of war echoed from the temples, and the scent of burning incense was replaced by the smell of smoke and fear. The people had seen enough. Their emperor, their living god, was held hostage by pale-skinned invaders who defiled temples and melted idols. The sacred city had turned into a prison for its own ruler. And then came the spark that set the empire ablaze. While Cortés was away quelling a rebellion of rival Spaniards on the coast, his lieutenant Pedro de Alvarado made a fatal mistake. During a sacred festival honoring the god Huitzilopochtli, the Aztecs gathered to dance, dressed in their finest gold and feather ornaments. But Alvarado feared rebellion, and his greed whispered louder than his caution. As the drums pounded and the dancers moved, the Spaniards sealed the gates of the temple courtyard and slaughtered everyone inside. The festival turned into a massacre. Gold ornaments clattered against stone, and the blood of nobles and priests stained the sacred ground. When the city learned what had happened, the people's reverence turned to rage. The gods had been mocked, and vengeance would be their offering. By the time Cortés returned, the empire was on fire. Stones and spears rained upon the palace. Thousands of Aztec warriors filled the causeways, their war cries echoing across the lake. Desperate, Cortés brought Montezuma to the balcony, hoping the sight of their emperor would calm his people. Wounded and weary, Montezuma begged them to stop. But the people had already made their choice. Someone, no one knows who, threw the first stone. It struck Montezuma in the head. The man once called divine collapsed, his crown falling beside him. He died days later, his blood soaking the floors of his own golden palace. The gods of gold had turned their faces away. That night, under cover of rain, Cortés ordered his men to flee. They loaded themselves with all the treasure they could carry, gold bars, ornaments, relics melted from the temples. But the weight of their greed was their undoing. As they crossed the causeways out of the city, Aztec warriors attacked from the canals and rooftops. The bridges collapsed. Canoes surrounded them. Arrows filled the air. Many drowned under the weight of gold they refused to let go. The survivors called it La Noche Triste, the night of sorrows. Gold had brought them glory. That night, it brought them to their knees. Tenochtitlan burned. The once golden city that shimmered like a jewel on the lake was now shrouded in smoke and thunder. Temples cracked, palaces crumbled, and the canals that once carried flowers now ran red with blood. In the chaos left by Montezuma's death, a new name rose, Cuauhtémoc, the last emperor of the Aztecs. He was only in his early 20s, but his courage was already legend. Where others prayed to the gods for mercy, Cuauhtémoc vowed to fight to the last breath. He told his warriors, "We will defend our city. We will defend our gods, even if the sun itself falls." For nearly 80 days, the Aztecs fought the invaders street by street, temple by temple. They tore down bridges, ambushed Spanish troops from rooftops, and used the canals to strike unseen. Disease, smallpox, brought unknowingly by the Spaniards, ravaged the city, claiming thousands, but still they fought on. Cortés had allied with over 100,000 indigenous warriors, most of them from tribes once enslaved by the Aztecs. It was not just conquest, it was vengeance. The siege turned Tenochtitlan into a graveyard of gold and stone. Food vanished. Water turned foul. Yet even then, the Aztecs melted down their last treasures into offerings, praying that their gods would return. Finally, on August 13th, 1521, the sound of battle faded. Cuauhtémoc, wounded and surrounded, tried to flee across the lake in a canoe, but Spanish ships blocked his way. He was captured and brought before Cortés, barefoot, bloodied, but unbroken. Cortés, seeing the young emperor's dignity, offered him words of false mercy. But Cuauhtémoc met his gaze and said, "I have done all that I could to defend my city and my people. Take your dagger now and end my life. Cortés refused. He needed the emperor alive. He demanded to know where the remaining gold was hidden. When Cuauhtémoc would not answer, the Spaniards tortured him with fire, burning his feet until the smell of smoke filled the air. But he never spoke. He endured in silence, the last act of defiance from a dying world. When the flames died, the empire was gone. Tenochtitlan lay in ruins, its temples torn down to make way for churches. Gold that once honored the gods was melted into coins for a foreign king. The age of the Aztecs had ended, and yet their story never truly faded. For beneath the modern city of Mexico City still lies the heart of Tenochtitlan, its stones, its spirit, and perhaps even its gold. The empire may have fallen, but its legacy still glitters beneath the surface of history. Because true gold never disappears. It simply waits for someone brave enough to uncover it again. The fires of Tenochtitlan have long gone cold, but the story of the Aztecs still burns, in legend, in memory, and in gold buried beneath centuries of silence. They built an empire from the heart of a lake, raised temples that touched the sky, and turned simple metal into the symbol of divine power. They fought for their gods and died for their legacy. And though their city was destroyed, the empire of gold never truly vanished. It simply changed hands, from the temples of Tenochtitlan to the vaults of Spain. The same gold that once crowned the sun god now lined the thrones of kings. Every coin, every relic, every glimmer of gold carried a story of conquest, courage, and loss, the price of power written in blood and fire. But this was only one empire. Across oceans and centuries, others rose, each chasing the same promise of glory, gold, and eternal power. So if you want to uncover the hidden stories of wealth that shaped our world, from the mines of Mali to the palaces of Vienna, subscribe to Empires of Gold. Because the rise and fall of fortune didn't end with the Aztecs. It's still happening, even now.